Look, first and foremost, I want to preface that I do respect, like, even admire Just Right's content. Yet, his recent video about Attack on Titan is part of a belief that I find is incredibly misguided and misunderstood, which leads to misinformation. Normally, I would never do this, or even think about criticizing someone's opinion as it should freely exist without being picked at. But there's just so much, pretty much everything, that I, and by the looks of it, his entire comment section disagrees with. Most, including myself, will know that so many factors within the story have been ignored. Entire elements are read wrong in ways I've never heard, and the absence of so many developments in the latest season. For those who will get triggered, I'm in no way saying my content is better. No way, would never dare to suggest that. In the end, I'm new to this platform, and so maybe he's the right one, but this is just my opinion, something he openly welcomed and has himself given to other YouTubers. Before I dive in, a little bit of context as to what's my position on the series is important. If it isn't clear, I am a massive fan, though that wasn't always the case. I've never really been a fanboy, someone who blindly supports a series or really anything. In fact, when I watched the first season, I was one of the brave few who would say, is this the masterpiece everyone was talking about? Sure, I liked it, and it was very good, but nothing like the masterpiece it was set up to be. That was until things happened in the story that reveal a deeper meaning to prior and future events, changing the entire plots of previous episodes and the very genre of the show. Literally, I cannot think of anything else, not even Breaking Bad, where as much meaning is put into every episode, pretty much every frame, even sometimes down to the very words. If that isn't deep, intricate writing where that can all be achieved without it feeling jarring, then I truly don't know what is. Ever since these details were revealed, I can say that Attack on Titan is possibly the best show ever made, at least for me. So yes, I am a huge fan, but clearly not biased, as I'm always willing to change my opinion, as I did with this very show. Now on to the actual analysis, which will involve spoilers for the entire show, up to at least the latest episode airing. Just Right's first observation is something I agree with, that we the audience, along with the characters, believe there is no moral wrong in killing what is essentially believed to be mindless titans. This makes sense as the characters believe them to just be empty killing machines, until we learn the titans are in fact humans, and that there are other entire societies. This is where the problems begin to start, as he then explains the introduction of Marley and how it came about. He talks about the internment camps within the society, referring to the armbands and so on to create a strong comparison to the Jewish community during World War II, directly suggesting an almost one-to-one comparison. Even if I was to kind of agree, what's the problem if it's handled with care and depth? You see, I would agree with Just Right if they did glorify and gloss over many factors, but Attack on Titan does not do that. It's absolutely not careless, a word Just Right felt was fitting. I won't prove that now, I'll do that later. I know that's a bit of a tease, but I need to acknowledge his remark about the show often disproving of the dangerous sentiments and ideas. However, he suggests that Isayama hasn't done enough to close off the dangerous interpretations, at least in the subtext. Sure, his story is more open when dealing with sensitive matters, but that's because he maybe wants to impart the nuance and complexity of these things never being as simple as people make it out. It's up to us as individuals, free of mind, to infer ideas from the story being told. And here you'll notice it's popular to find people have very dangerous views, often politically driven about pretty much any piece of entertainment. Nowadays, I find everyone is always able to find a political way for something to be either dangerous or sloppy. Lord of the Rings not too long ago came under mass scrutiny for its creator supposedly being a racist, as he made a race, the Orcs, outright evil. Or even The Last of Us Part 2 was bashed for being a mouthpiece of SJW politics. It has really become the norm in the West for us to criticize entertainment with a political lens, and that's fine, but sometimes we can be doing more harm than good, putting harmful messages and ideas that weren't exactly there, even if they may have been used as inspiration. Also, this idea of people inferring their own meanings from a story, even the most dangerous of views, should never be blamed upon the creator. Just Right gets into this very dangerous territory of assuming that Isayama is almost responsible for how other human beings interpret his story, going as far to mention that the most despicable of people look towards the series as an advocation of their beliefs. The problem with this kind of thinking is, as he suggested, these are the most foul and most illogical people, so it's not Isayama's fault that they'll turn and twist matters to fit their illogical ideological views. That's no fault of the creator. He should not be held responsible, especially when he denounces these dangerous views throughout, as I'll prove over the course of this video. Nevertheless, Just Right also dives into well-researched public knowledge of Isayama's inspirations and influences for varied characters and ideas. These examples he picks out clearly derive from imperialistic sources. He's not wrong, I entirely agree, yet it's the conclusion he comes to that's my problem. Just because you use something for inspiration doesn't mean you advocate for it or the idea. People can even dislike other human beings, but still are able to find admirable qualities. Anyway, continuing on, he refers to Attack on Titan being a war story too. I agree to some extent, but that's not the root nor is it the core focus. For me and many others, the core idea amongst the many is by and far large freedom. It's so obvious to me, and the handling of it is extremely refreshing to see the fight for liberty is so punishing and grueling. So many narratives have faltered and fallen into cliches of glorifying the fight for freedom. After all, there's nothing more honourable than the fight for the concept of our very own rights. Yet, for some reason, people, even stories, choose to ignore the struggles that came in fighting for that freedom. Much of that pain is ignored. Sure, you'll find stories that have some tough events occur, but they don't really last or are ever present with its impact upon even the characters. Attack on Titan, though, puts that pain at the centre of its pursuit for freedom. It doesn't filter at all. You have characters reference that their very fight for what they deem as honourable can see themselves turn into devils. The better truth of Attack on Titan is that these fighters for their freedom will not be the ones to soak in the glory of an honourable goal, as the payment is often dealt with pain. Therefore, this freedom they fight for is for the next generation to do better. I really appreciate that. Attack on Titan portrays this idea as a heavy burden that morphs these innocent children into beaten down and even grey characters. However, it seems in the heat of this analysis that I've glossed over something vitally important. So important that it's the backbone to Just Right's argument: subtext. That's not me poking fun. If you watched his video and even the articles on the subject, this word pops up often in their arguments. Therefore, if the subtext interpretation can be dismantled, then the video's point somewhat falls down like a house of cards and present what I believe is potentially shallow manipulative arguments. So what is subtext? By the definition of multiple sources, it's the underlying message, the theme that conveys an overall idea in the background of what's explicitly heard or shown. Simply, it's a hidden meaning, or a less obvious one that may not be conveyed through dialogue. As a result, I can easily see why some believe that fascism or violence are being glorified, as Just Right suggests that is the subtext message he receives. But I disagree. It could even be argued that there's a slight confusion as to what warrants subtext and the specific messages. For instance, onto the matter of the action set pieces, Just Right acknowledges the characters and the show's writing will tell you to feel bad or condemn certain things, whereas in the subtext, they convey the opposite and glorify the violence through flashy animation and music. However, isn't the characters performing amazing tricks and them feeling no remorse warranted in killing mindless titans the in-your-face, explicit message? After all, it is the prominent feature that's conveyed and is also marketed heavily. We had zero grounds to actually feel bad for these titans for so many episodes. The acknowledgement that killing them is a bad thing is only conveyed within the subtext, with little info here and there about them possibly being humans. And when we do finally learn the truth of the titans, there is a profound moment of reflection, not just from the characters, but the audience. The way we interpreted scenes such as this and this are now much more sympathetic than the pure, undeniable blame and rage assigned initially. So essentially what I'm getting at is that just maybe the subtext here is, oh wait a minute, you've been presenting this to be all fun and cool and fine for the majority of the series, but now with the information I have, which was hinted at here and there, makes this kind of sad now, knowing the information we do. The show isn't actually telling you to feel bad for the Titans. As you said, they heavily early on presented positively. However, the series plants a seed of doubt, telling you, the audience, that maybe you should be thinking more and that something is possibly odd here. So when the truth does get revealed and the shocking reasoning behind it, you can retrace those hints within the show as to something far more sinister behind those supposedly epic positive scenes. Simultaneously, it presents an idea that Isayama has put throughout the series, that violence which seems justified through the music, gorgeous animation, the characters feeling no remorse, may still not be morally right. Nothing is ever just black and white. Actually, I feel there's more to say on this matter, as the show doesn't ever want you to think that the actions are unambiguously good. Eren Yeager brutally kills. Owen has manipulated his comrades multiple times into dying for the sake of humanity, when it was actually for his own selfish desires. And he massacres the Levi squad, and it goes on and on. Yes, these scenes all look great, and some even look morally justifiable at the time, but you are ignoring the fact that later in the show we find out that humanity inside the walls is not as justified as we initially thought. Since we're also speaking about the matter of violence, I find it's important again to note that Just Right insists there's almost a glorification of violence. This is clearly a huge bone I have to pick with his analysis. Some can say the show is just merely representing the skill and precision of said characters. It's not saying their violence is morally right, not at all. In fact, to use the clip he used of Mikasa heroically dispatching the enemy with violence, she then moments later on looks Eren in the eyes, questioning his humanity as he just killed children. For every action that romanticizes violence, there is always one that undermines it. Attack on Titan is one of the few shows where I almost got sick to the stomach because of the darkness and complications the series brings when dealing with violence and war. Yes, sure, violence is used a lot, but it's never said or presented as the right option, rather the contrary. You have Armin himself, a character the audience can identify as the smartest person, constantly talking about how we should avoid conflict and the ramifications of their actions. Even the music in the later season when Armin commits such a horrific act is painfully sad. Actually, a really clear moment is back in season 3 when Jean is about to get shot by a member of Kenny's squad. However, it is Armin who saves him, shooting the human. This leads to Armin calling into question his very humanity, finding it hard to move on until Levi tells him the truth of the matter. And I'm sure right now Just Right's probably insisting, shaking his screen, going, I know the show acknowledges that violence and other actions are wrong, but it's the subtext. Yet I ask you, irrespective of what you believe is the subtext, is this not enough? It's rare for any show, even movies, to self-criticize or plant doubt to actions as often as Attack on Titan. They seriously do it so much that, hand on heart, it'd take me forever to go over. Yes, sometimes they maybe play heroic, epic music, or a cool sequence with beautiful animation, but maybe that's there to trick the audience for them to be hit in the face with the real ramifications, aka a misdirect. If this series has not condemned the action, violence, its entire roster of characters' decisions, then I truly will never find anything that does or has. Enough of that, otherwise, as I said, I could be here all day showing examples. Another point Just Right makes is about military propaganda. He mentions the show has military solutions to solve its problems and that the soldiers themselves are the only competent people. He goes a step further and even insists the show presents the military, in particular the coup d'etat, as unambiguously good. I disagree with this so strongly that I was waiting for him to say psych. For one, there are other people outside the military occupation that are competent, such as Rod Rice and Tiber. Sure, there's a lack of them, but that's because Attack on Titan is constructed to focus upon its military, which exposes all of the problems that come with a military-led civilization. Actually, to prove that, back towards the coup d'etat, which, remember, he says is portrayed as unambiguously good. The coup by the military isn't supposed to be seen as a positive thing. In season 4, Hanji hides the truth about Eren from the Eldians inside the walls, and she remembers that the men she tortured told her that she will be the new actor deceiving the people. She is continuing the negative cycle and is a hypocrite on her own right. Even Pixis, a man you portray as sort of admirable, is a man who is loyal to only his duty above all else, willing to even possibly backstab his own comrades.
わしはこのエルヴィンと同じ思いを持ちながらも、結局はあなた方政府に任せる方が人類のためになるのではという迷いがあった。おそらくわしらよりずっと壁や巨人に詳しいでしょうからな。もしあなた方がより多くの人類を救えるのであれば、エルヴィンを処刑台に送ってもよいと思っておった。当然、場合によってはわしらも首を差し出す覚悟もあった。
The story does not present the leaders of the military coup as unambiguously good. That's absurd. I don't know how these points were ignored, as there is still so much more. Nevertheless, I don't want to kick a dead horse, so I'll just move on. Just Right doesn't only go as far to mention that the show pushes its fictional military, but is also a form of Japanese military propaganda in the real world. If that's the case, it's a damn poor one, as it self-critiques and has recently in the latest season shown the problems that arise from military-led civilizations. He further details how the show is condemning Eren and Marley, but then they're being hypocrites in that there is no moral questioning upon the coup that happened earlier on. He even moans about why no one changes to a more democratic system, mentioning nothing from Eren was even said. But with how flawed they've presented his character, why would someone like Eren sacrifice what may be deemed as the full power of freedom? The military, of which Eren is a part of, are atop of the chain, meaning greater freedom for a man who thirsts for the taste of life's greater liberties. This makes Eren sound questionable, and that's the reason why lately in the show he has been presented as a questionable figure. In fact, he may even be the final villain. Another point is that in Attack on Titan, they have had somewhat normal monarch rule, as we have had in past medieval times, but then shifted their system as we have done too. But neither has the correct answer. Both have handled matters poorly, even if it's better than the previous ideas. Attack on Titan isn't saying the military rule is right and the best, but it's just the next logical step of progression from corrupt royals. Not only that, but to your question again about why no one changed to democracy, how would they even implement that exactly? Someone brought this up in your comment section and I will highlight it again. There's a lot of questions you have to ask when attempting to create democracy. The United States of America first wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and the Constitution wasn't ratified by all states until 1790. Things take time, a certain amount of time that simply hasn't passed yet. Just Right then fully dives into the potential messaging of fascism. He goes on to talk about how Attack on Titan almost mirrors that of rising fascist states in the past, where they believe they were once great but now confined, and a way to solve this is to get back at those who impose such conditions. I agree, but his attribution of that to Attack on Titan is certainly misunderstood. His reference, his evidence of this, is that Eren feels like livestock, held back by the Titans. However, I, along with the others, read this entirely different. That's the obvious in-your-face factor, but why does Eren feel like that? It doesn't come back to being a once great nation or whatsoever, but the basic principle of freedom, a human's liberty. After all, as Eren says, it's his birthright. The imagery and referencing of freedom is everywhere. The very opening shot is of two soaring birds, a fitting representation of freedom. And they're going beyond the walls, something that only humanity can imagine. But as you say, you still think it's promoting a fascist story. If anything, I would say Attack on Titan is an anti-fascist story. The scouts are portrayed as competent, but the leader Owen often does things that are explicitly horrible in the name of freedom, which is actually to fulfill his own selfish goals.
一流の詐欺師のように体のいい方便を並べなくてはならない。私が先頭を走らなければ誰も続く者はいないだろう。そして私は真っ先に死ぬ。地下室に何があるのか知ることもなくな。
は？
俺はこのまま地下室に行きたい。俺が今までやってこれたのもいつかこんな日が来ると思ってたからだ。いつか答え合わせができるはずだと。
Eren has always been presented as questionable and is possibly going to be, by my prediction, the final villain. The military does take control from the government, but in Season 4 we see how that has harmed the Society of Paradise and the trust citizens have in their government, as well as how the new military government has just gone on to do the many awful things that previous governments did. Marlians on Paradise are treated similarly to Eldians in Marley too, showing an element in the story about how oppressed groups gaining power and looking for revenge is ultimately destructive and only creates endless oppression. This all makes it purely anti-fascist, and even demonizes the main character in many instances to further that point. Now this matter is very touchy, and it's incredibly important I handle it appropriately. Just Right spends a portion of the video diving into the Eldians of Attack on Titan, a group he says essentially resembled the Jewish that suffered persecution by Nazi Germany. Therefore, he logically says you can feel sympathetic for them as they're suffering unjustly under authoritarian government. He's somewhat right and mentions the Eldians and Marlians too have justifiable means to hate each other from their own views, Eldians though being far more justified. However, since he believes the Eldians are one-to-one creations of the Jewish who suffered barbaric treatment, he then concludes that by adding this sort of rationale to the Marlians' view of the Eldians, that Isayama is saying there was some sort of rationale for the way the Jewish were treated. This is so wrong, and it's incredibly dangerous to think this way, to even suggest it. The Eldians are not one-to-one allegorical representations of the Jewish during World War II. Certainly they are inspired by them, but they're different. In this fictitious world, Isayama has made it that the Eldians have done wrong and must have for the Marlians to act in the way they have. Gruger after all says none of their histories, even their own, is entirely true. Because what is truth?
この世に真実などない。それが現実だ。誰だって神でも悪魔にでもなれる。誰かがそれを真実だと言えばな。
By making the Eldians potentially oppressive, it's instantly a staunch difference between the Jewish community, who didn't do anything wrong that would rationalize the inhumane treatment they suffered. They were not persecuting or oppressing others as they suggest the Eldians possibly were. This is an important distinction made and suggested in the story. It's not brought up often, and that's maybe because the story is being written from the journey of the Eldians we follow. This all speaks though on a larger matter, which is that oppression in the story is a constant cycle due to people pursuing complete control and revenge. Also, if Isayama is adding rationale for his characters and even the people to act one way, and you interpret it as Isayama saying the Jewish got what they deserved, then that speaks more to you as a viewer than Isayama's political beliefs, because that's just ludicrous. Things do get worse, as he says something I would have never expected, that white supremacists see these monsters, of which can only be Eldians in the story, as Jewish people or resembling the features associated with the Jewish. Are we seriously doing that? Are we seriously going to use that as evidence of racism in the story? Using other people's interpretations, especially people who have illogical views. We can't rationalize, prompt serious discussion and criticism because people are interpreting media one way. As I said earlier, everyone can interpret literally anything, as they do right now, with a political lens that can be offensive. This doesn't mean the show was sloppy, careless, or didn't do enough to quash these sentiments. We as humans cannot funnel or change everyone's mindset. It's bound to happen that you have people who have alternative views entirely, especially if the show is political at its core. It just doesn't matter how white supremacists view Attack on Titan. Bigoted people have often misinterpreted stories to fit their ideology despite the author's intentions being directed elsewhere. It's also certainly true the Marlians themselves are not presented as black or white. They are made into living humans with depth. They love as inside their tanks we see their loved ones. They feel guilt as most pertinent would Reiner. They are most importantly though, brainwashed people and made to believe the Eldians are evil monsters. This victim-like history and constant fear they could be destroyed now warrants in their view some sort of rationale behind their heinous actions. Isayama is also obviously not saying the Marleans are good, after all they were the oppressors. Yet it's equally important to note that both histories are bound to have lies. In general, the Marleans that continue the mistake of oppression is due to the former ancestors who have used propaganda to corrupt their understanding. This propaganda, a fascist tool, is portrayed so horribly as it is harming the Eldians through the perpetuation of false violence and hate assumed upon their race. As a result, when the tides turn, it reverses in a backlash of oppression towards the Marleans who live within the walls of Paradise. Fascism and its most well-known tool of propaganda is shown to be the root of all suffering within this fictitious world.
お前の大事な人が俺にも大事な人がいたエルディア人だ悪魔の末裔だだが彼女は誰よりも俺の料理をうまそうに食ったこのクソみたいな戦争から俺を救ってくれたんだ人を喜ばせる料理を作るのが本当の俺なんだと教えてくれたそれがサシャ・ブラウスお前に生まれた彼女の名前だ
私だって大事な人たちを殺されたそのサシャ・ブラウスに撃ち殺されただから報復してやった先に殺したのはそっちだ知るかよどっちが先とか目を覚ましてあなたはマーレの兵士でしょきっとその悪魔の女に惑わされてる悪魔なんかに負けないで
If a writer nowadays adds a reason, rationality for why a despicable character with maybe disgusting views acts the way he does, it is immediately deemed offensive. Adding any sort of nuance, depth, or reason is considered insensitive. Attack on Titan rationalizes things from the perspective of its characters, even if what they do is morally wrong. It's really showing, with far more complexity, how moral events can easily unfold and be rationalized in the eyes of these questionable characters. Not every story has clear-cut good guys and bad guys, and the author is not always responsible for what lessons someone takes from their creation. This story requires smart viewers who pay attention, not those who have knee-jerk reactions and force their worldviews into the narrative. Who the story doesn't need most of all though, is viewers who say, hey, some of those titans have large noses, hey look at those armbands, Isayama's adding some sort of rationale here into this fictitious world, also probably he's pro-fascist or anti-Semitic. That is so stupid and it's such a backwards way of thinking. It's not productive and it's just harmful in its own right. This is a part of the video I'm not happy I'm making, and I wish I didn't have to say it, but I need to cover it since it's how I generally felt when I watched Just Right's video. At the end of the day, I have no problem with people disliking Attack on Titan or the myriad of other things that I love. I don't make videos like this, even when I very much disagreed with Angry Joe's take on The Last of Us Part 2. However, I feel Just Right's video could potentially be dangerous in its own right in discrediting a creator's work and discouraging future stories. The arguments simply don't hold up and seem like they're in bad faith just to tackle a political matter which was ripe on the lips of many. It literally comes across as though he is making this video to attack the writer and the show for even daring to tackle sensitive matters. This is apparent all over the video as he will say how incredibly simple the story is, even though those who watch it and even himself have misunderstood things. Not in a way because it's being brushed over or poorly explained, but because concepts are being delved in ways many stories avoid, 2 feet deep. He says he purely likes the show as an action series and suggests that's it. This is a huge slap in the face of the series, as its main thing and the reason as to why it's so adored by fans, even critics, is because of the story, but most importantly, its storytelling. In fact, let me talk about a side character who he tears into, Gabby. She isn't even my favourite, but is written well, exposing how propaganda can distort someone's sense of truth. We as humans define ourselves from our history. What we do, how we go about our day-to-day business, what is considered acceptable is derived from our very history. Gabby is a perfect example of this. Also, she's a direct parallel to Eren Yeager in earlier seasons. Not exact one-to-one, but very similar. So similar that what you see Isayama is doing is that all the bloodshed will result in nothing but a constant cycle of hate. This is just one of the many ideas posed in Attack on Titan which Gabby helps to bring to the forefront. Whenever giving the show genuine fair praise, Just Right will refer only to the show's commercial success, with no recognition of its significant accomplishments critically. Now, he may not have been aware of how critically well received the series is, but that's hard to believe since Just Right is usually a thorough writer and his content is typically well researched. So it's odd when he has no reference to that in the slightest. For those unaware, Attack on Titan on IMDb, a respected scoring site, is the only show, I repeat, in its database which goes as far back as 1928, where it has multiple episodes with perfect 10s. These perfect scores are not seen often, only 3 on the site exist: Breaking Bad's Ozymandias, Hero, and Assault from Attack on Titan. This goes without mentioning the fact the series on the same site has a recorded better consistency at hitting those episodes above the 9s than the likes of Breaking Bad and possibly Game of Thrones. These are incredible feats which are only more impressive when you consider this is an anime. Like it or not, it's known that within the anime community it's very common to disagree as to what's the best, but Attack on Titan is the first show in this last decade, possibly forever, that the majority can gather behind, besides the odd few. And with the test of time, where all ratings level out after a few months, we see all these factors remain. It's truly remarkable. I know this is all kind of besides the point, but I do find it odd to continuously omit the mentioning of its critical success when talking about its accomplishments. Actually, at the end of Just Right's video, towards the end of it, he says the word that comes to his mind when he thinks of Isayama's handling of his problems is careless. With that, I instantly knew he misunderstood things, because you're telling me this man right here was careless in constructing a story which he has meticulously planted hints towards plot and characters everywhere. All you need to do is look at the title of the very first episode and chapter to know that Isayama is going to pay that off. He has possibly already told us the ending without us realizing it. His twist too, which Just Right suggests are also careless, is beyond ludicrous. The very twists have changed the entire genre, but even the plots of previous episodes due to him lacing so many clues frame to frame. Honestly, when I heard that word, I was gobsmacked, to the point I will say back to Just Right, I believe his video and analysis only brings up one word: careless. Careless to label a story like Attack on Titan as careless. Careless to neglect many factors. Careless to manipulate events. Careless to make one-to-one comparisons. Careless to misunderstand things in such a knee-jerk manner. Careless is by and large the word that comes to my mind, and although he may not believe it, I hate that that's the case. Now, if you're at this point in the video, I want to thank you, since if it wasn't obvious, I have been quite transparent with my feelings. I wear my heart on my sleeve, so I hope you appreciate that. This subject matter is quite personal for me. I'm genuinely terrified of the idea that the things I love, such as anime, is soon going to be overtaken and washed away with bad faith and politically driven attacks. I'm actually a recent fan of the genre because of my growing dissatisfaction with Western entertainment's insistence of politically bashing great films like Joker. That movie got ran through the mud just for fleshing out a villain and dealing with dangerous ideas. The result of this has been meaningless nothing media has become so commonplace. It seems like people like to have stories that maybe has a message here and there, but don't like being posed interesting ideas or stuff in ways that maybe haven't been done before. Now maybe if this vid takes off, he'll make a new one, trying to reinforce what he said, or reassess his view entirely, or actually ignore the matter, which is all perfectly fine. After all, it is his opinion. With that, I hope no one sends abuse his way, as some may agree with him, and I think he deserves a fair chance. I feel like I haven't abused him, but made some fair constructive criticism, albeit a bit passionate.